Welcome, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and start right on time. I know we're expecting a few more participants, but we will just wait for them to allow them to join as we continue on. As you join, please just go ahead and type your name and your organization in the chat box. It would be good to let everyone know who's on the training, but we won't have time for introductions once we start. So welcome, everyone. My name is Deborah Backus, and I'm with World Vision, representing All Children Reading, a grand challenge for development. We're excited that you're able to join us today on this webinar on creating accessible ebooks. Before we start, I wanted to note just a couple of things. We will be recording this webinar and we'll be sharing it on our website at allchildrenreading.org. Unfortunately, today we won't be providing simultaneous closed captioning, but that will be included in the recording after the fact. So let's begin. If you have any audio problems throughout, I recommend just exiting the meeting and trying to re-enter. And if you have any questions or comments throughout, please feel free to just put those in the chat box. I know a lot of you know about All Children Reading, but for those of you who don't, All Children Reading is a partnership of USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government. We run a series of global competitions to leverage science, technology, to source, test, and disseminate scalable solutions to improve early grade literacy around the world. One of those competitions that we're sharing is Book Boost, the Access for All Challenge. And you'll see the link for that in the chat box shortly. We know as All Children Reading, and many of you on the phone, that globally there's a shortage of books in many languages. But for children with print disabilities, there's even fewer books that are accessible and in these formats. So All Children Reading partners have joined forces with Pearson's Project Literacy, and we're seeking to drive innovation in accessible publishing. This webinar today is intended to support those of you that are interested in competing in the Book Boost Challenge, but is also for anyone that's interested in creating more accessible content. We will have a follow-up training next week at the same time on December 12th about creating accessible images. The focus of today's presentation is really on how do we create accessible ebooks. We won't be getting into the specifics of the challenge. Questions for that challenge can be posted on our through our All Children Reading email. But today we will just be focusing on best practice and models for creating ebooks. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Charles Lapierre with Benetech. Benetech is a global leader in software for social good and is a former grantee and partner of All Children Reading. Charles is an expert in creating accessible content and is here today to provide us with insight on best practices. Throughout Charles' presentation, please feel free to add your comments and questions to the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of his presentation. And so now I will turn it over to Charles.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here. Make sure that share screen. All right, you all should now be able to see that.
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And as Deborah mentioned, I'm here to talk about how to make EPUBs accessible. And let's see here. All right, first off, Benetech has 3 initiatives to help promote, educate, and share accessible materials. Our Born Accessible initiative works directly with publishers to help them create accessible EPUBs so that, that a book born digital is also born accessible. The Diagram Center works with standards bodies and the community to create standards, guidelines, and best practices to ensure all digital content, which also includes EPUBs, are fully accessible. Bookshare also provides access to these materials in an accessible format. Making EPUB books or ebooks accessible isn't rocket science, okay? But there are a lot of stuff in there, so we're here to help. There are well-defined standards, guidelines, and best practices and examples to help you along, so you're not alone. And making your books accessible not only helps the disabled, but anyone who uses your book. For example, if you want the book to self-read when your eyes are tired at the end of the day, and you just don't want to strain your eyes anymore, or you want to be able to increase the font size to see what that footnote says. Being able to zoom in yourself just makes for a better overall end user experience. Okay. So a little bit about myself. I've worked in this accessibility field for over 20 years. I co-edited the EPUB Accessibility 1.0 specification that was released earlier this year, contributed to the BISG's Quick Start Guide for Accessible Publishing, and co-facilitator of the Digital Publishing Accessibilities Task Force within the W3C. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to talk about standards, primarily WCAG, the W3C, semantic markups for EPUB, ARIA, and HTML, and the Accessibility 1.0 specification for discovery metadata. Then get into guidelines and help. So I'll talk a little bit about the book industry study group's Quick Start Guide to Accessible Publishing and their top tips, provide you some code samples, and at the end of this presentation, which you'll have access to later, will be a number of different links to everything that I've talked about today. I'll then go into some tools showing you how to use EPUB check to make sure that your EPUBs are valid, and then the new ACE tool, the accessibility checking tool by Daisy. And then finally wrap up with our Benetech's new Global Certified Accessible initiative to ensure EPUBs are conformant to the new accessibility specification. Okay, first off, standards. Let's get that out of the way first. So the World Wide Web, W3C, is our standards body. And that's for mostly web pages, but EPUBs are built on web pages, essentially. So HTML5, CSS, SVG, this is all within the W3C's domain. Then there's a WAY initiative, Web Accessibility Initiative, which created WCAG. You might have heard that, which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the current version is 2.0, although they're working on the next version, 2.1, which should be out probably next year. And then there's the Accessible Rich Internet Applications, or ARIA. And the version that we're currently referencing is 1.0. They're actually in a recommendation candidate right now in the W3C for ARIA 1.1, which adds some new special features that will be very exciting to get to use in the future. And the former International Digital Publishing Forum, or the IDPF, they were the maintainers. They created the EPUB specification and that new EPUB accessibility specification. And again, EPUBs are built on web technologies. Now, earlier this year, the IDPF merged into the W3C, which now places EPUB within the W3C's domain. And anything that the W3C works on to make web pages more accessible, EPUB gets by default, since it's built on that same technologies. EPUB 3.1 was approved earlier this year, in January actually. Now that EPUB 3.1 is the latest specification, but there's not a lot of publishers that are actually creating EPUB 3.1 content. And that's, it takes a while for them to change their practices. So the older version 3.0.1 is still in use. and we're waiting for EPUB check to catch up and support the new features of 3.1. Included also is that new Accessibility 1.0 specification on conformance and discovery requirements that I mentioned. And, but we want to be practical. We want to make sure that publishers really are able to produce accessible EPUBs in their normal production processes. So this Accessibility 1.0 specification wasn't set at too high a bar so that everyone should be able to meet this. So let me introduce WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now these guidelines cover a wide range of disabilities. So from persons with blindness, low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, learning disabilities, cognitive, so covers the gamut. So, and the WCAG is fundamentally broken up into 3 levels. Single A, which is the lowest bar, double A, a little bit harder to reach, and triple A, the holy grail, which is very difficult because some of these different disabilities conflict with each other, and making something accessible for one group makes it inaccessible to a different group. So we have to be flexible here. And so that's why we're not requiring everything to be AAA, for example. WCAG is based on 4 primary fundamental principles. The content must be perceivable. You must be able to interact, like get at the data, i.e. see it and then hear it, and in some cases touch it or feel it. Operable, must be able to have multiple different ways to interact with it if you're using a keyboard or a mouse or by speech. Understandable, it's got to make sense. It's got to be, you know, in a correct flow. You know, without being understandable, you're in big trouble. And robust. So you need to be able to support a number of different assistive technologies. So your content should be accessible using a screen reader or a magnifier. So that's what robust is for. So I'm going to go through very briefly the level A WCAG that are specific to digital publishing. Okay. And there are links to the actual specification, so I'm not going to go into great detail on all of these. I'm just going to go through them all quickly for you now. So the main one here is non-text content. Images must be described, end of story. Info and relationships, you know, if you're going to have lists and tables, mark them as lists and tables and asides and footnotes. Having semantic markup is crucial for assistive technology. Meaningful sequence, your spine in your EPUB must list all content documents and should be in the correct reading order for assistive technologies to go through. Just makes sense. Sensory characteristics, don't identify objects or you know, in your book by color alone or shape or size or position. Use of color, so if you don't have, for example, saying something like have all your nouns are in red and the verbs are in blue. You're colorblind, you have no idea what that is. So there's different techniques on how to solve these problems. Operable, being able to interact with your EPUB through a keyboard. If you add special controls in your or widgets in your EPUBs, make sure that it doesn't trap the keyboard. So when you get to that control, there's no way except for clicking a mouse or something or touching different part of the screen to get out of that. So no keyboard traps. Make sure all the pages are titled correctly, and that the focus order is in the correct order, and that if you have any links in your EPUBs, that they are in context, that they're meaningful, so that a person with screen reader knows by activating this link where that's going to be taking them. Is it going to take them outside the book, potentially? So make sure that that's well described. Understandable, language of the page. That's actually a fundamental. EPUB check, I think, will complain if you don't have the correct language, but make sure every page has the language that the page is. Focus, make sure that the focus order is correct. Labels and instructions. Parsing, EPUB check will run the EPUB check, and I'll show you that later in the presentation without errors. And robust, make sure things are marked up with correct roles, values, and names. Okay, and here are the AA requirements that are publishing related. Contrast, minimum contrast, it's actually 4.1 to 1 contrast ratio. If you have a background color and then you have text on top of that, that could be an issue for a person with low vision. And having that contrast, minimum contrast ratio helps for them to be able to read that content. There's a number of different checkers out there on the that are free to use to validate that. Resizable text. Don't create 5-point font and fix that font size, and then you're basically disallowing anyone to then magnify, increase the font size through the reading system. And images of text is a big no-no. If you have text, put it as text. Don't create an image and then throw the image in there. And if there's some absolute reason you have to do that, make sure that alt text has the text that's in the image completely in the alt text. Operable. Multiple ways of getting to different pages. So if you have a table of contents, that's one way to get to the page. And as long as you can go from one page to the next, that's another way. So that you've already you've met that criteria. And if you have a page list, even better, you've had a third way of getting to that, or a list of images or tables, for example. Make sure your headings are labeled. Focus visible, that's handled through CSS so that you know when you're on a particular link or heading that you can see that visually. This helps for low vision users, especially if you're jumping from one link to a different part of the book, to then focus their attention on where they landed. Understandable, language of parts. This is a great for potentially if you change, if you have, let's say, a paragraph or a sentence that is in a different language, mark it up so that a screen reader, when it comes in and says, oh, this is a French passage, it will, if the screen reader is capable and has that language, it will switch languages automatically and then speak in French with a French accent and read that pronounced correctly instead of having the default English, for example, try and speak the French words, which would be very difficult to understand. All right, let's get on to semantic markup and ARIA. So make sure all of your content is marked up semantically using either HTML, ARIA roles, or EPUB specific types. Here is not an exhaustive list. This is just a sample of some of the more common document portions of your document that you may encounter. A cover page, for example, chapters, title page, table of contents. If you have a list of images, and you have, corresponding EPUB types, what their values would be, and then associated ARIA roles. And again, in the appendix at the end of this, there's links on where all of these complete lists are available for you. And you should use these to help semantically mark up your content. Okay, now the Accessibility 1.0 specification. So this is first ever accessibility guidelines and really sets the bar on how to make your documents accessible. The WCAG requirement is single A. And actually there's a caveat that even though it's single A, complex image descriptions don't need a longer description. We set the bar, you know, as low as we can, but every image must have alt text. And this 1.0 specification, so it has the WCAG single A and also a few EPUB specific like page navigation. Here are some concrete musts that you may need to make sure that you do. All headings must be marked as HTML. This is critical for navigation. Screen readers can jump from heading to heading. This is a great way for them to get around the book. All textual content using HTML markup, i.e. paragraphs, block quotes, list items, etc., tables. Make sure it's all marked up as in plain HTML. And there's countless examples on the internet on how to do that. All content must be in logical reading order. I can't harp on that enough. You don't want the aside that talks about a warning to the user not to touch a hot pan to come after the information talking about moving the pan. You know, so having this logical reading order is crucial. All images must be marked as either presentational, described in the surrounding text, have fig captions, or the associated alt text. A conformant EPUB publication must meet the following criteria when it includes page navigation. Must provide means of locating the page breaks, and if there's a print equivalent, must include the in the metadata the source of that book. Discoverability. This is something that we're promoting, and it's part of the specification, so that Google search and all these search engines will start picking up on this accessibility metadata, and we'll be able to find these books out there. And part of that, there's 4 main portions, metadata that we're looking for. Access mode. Is the content only textual based? There's no visual components at all. You just have access mode textual. If there's any images, then you would have access modes as textual and visual. If there's any audio, you would add that. Accessibility features, is there any long descriptions? Are the images described? If you have math, is there MathML, etc.? Accessibility hazards. Maybe it's none. But if you have any video, you might want to make sure that that you don't have any flashing that potentially could cause seizures. So you'd mark that in your accessibility hazards. And the accessibility summary. This is a human readable text that basically tells the end user what's the, how accessible is this book in layman's terms? Is there any gotchas? Is there any, an example would be, this is well described, all of the images are described, the tables have summaries, and although in one of the appendices we were unable to get permission to provide, or unable to provide alt text for one of the appendices. Something like that you could add as an accessibility summary. Recommended metadata, access mode sufficient. This is a little bit tricky to understand, but the basic idea here is, what does it take to consume this book completely, as far as the access modes? So if it's all textual, then access mode sufficient is textual. If all of the images are described and have alt text, then one of the access modes can be textual, because even though there's images, they're described so in text. So that would be fine. But you could also have textual in combination with visual as a combo, if there was any images that weren't described, for example. Okay, now let's get into some guidelines for you and some helpful hints. So the Book Industry Study Group, the BISG, they produced a quick start guide to accessible publishing a couple of years ago now, and they're in the process of revamping this in light of the new accessibility 1.0 specification that was out. So here are their top tips, and the book I linked to, it's free to download and has a lot of great information and examples. Some of their extended image descriptions are a little bit outdated, but I don't believe that you'll be doing, I'm hoping that you're not going to be doing a lot of extended image descriptions, that alt text will cover that, and Sue-Ann will be covering that in our next presentation. So here are the top tips. Use HTML5. Make sure that your headings are all marked up, heading levels 1 through 6. Use of HTML5 tags and EPUB structural semantics. Provide complete navigation. Make sure, again, logical reading order. Can't stress that enough. Separate presentation from content. Don't use images to represent tables. Yeah, we've seen those, and that's just horrible. If it's a table, make it an HTML table. That allows the screen reader user to navigate and to go by cells and go by different columns and really get a sense of the table, instead of if you had an image and you try to describe that, it's just not as clean. Use correct markup for decorative images. And if there's any images that are complex, that you should use extended image descriptions. And again, the techniques that we had in that book are outdated, and we're now recommending some new that we're currently working on. Again, page numbers, if there's equivalent, defining of the language. I don't believe you'll be needing to use the EPUB for Education profile. Again, I also don't think that you'll have to use MathML. Any math that you like, simple things like x plus 2, just write it as x plus 2 equals 5. You know, simple stuff. Just use regular, HTML. Provide access to alternative access to media content. If you have a video, make sure it's closed captioned. And again, add the accessibility metadata. Okay, and actually today there's a BISG meeting over in New York that they're currently working on the next version of the top tips and the quick start guide. So stay tuned for that. Here are some important things to note. I have 3 slides on some of the findings that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. Make sure all images have short alt text. Try to keep this under 200 characters if possible. There's been a lot of debate on this. It's okay if you go beyond 200 characters. The screen readers had at one point in time a hard stop, and the actual number is vague, and people claim different numbers, 128, and some say 256. 200 characters, just a small description is probably good enough. You want to keep those short and sweet because of the cognitive load. That text that's being spoken to the user can't stop that. It's spoken all at once. So there's no way to navigate it word by word or character by character. It's just one string that's sent to the assistive technology that's spoken. So keeping it short will help the cognitive load on the user. Decorative images must have alt equals quote, quote. You cannot not include alt. That must be in the markup. So alt equals quote, quote. And we also recommend using role equals presentational. Having that signifies that, you know, it helps people understand that you didn't forget to put in the alt and you just put alt equals quote, quote to pass something. Definitely don't put alt equals image. That is a very, very bad no-no. Make sure it's meaningful. Hierarchy, H1 through H6 is often misapplied or doesn't cascade. Don't jump from heading 1 to heading 4 back to heading 2 without, you know, make sure it's heading 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, and then, so skipping is considered a no-no. Many EPUBs have the title of the HTML file wrong. So in your markup, make sure that the title is like the meaningful title of the chapter or whatever page that is on. And if you know, another thing as a fallback, make sure that the actual file names themselves are meaningful, not just a bunch of random numbers .xhtml. Because if there is no title element, the screen reader might then read that horrible file name that you've included in your EPUB. So as a fallback, I would definitely have good title and also good meaningful file names, even if it's just chapter 1.xhtml, perfectly fine. There are occasional validation errors at EPUBs. Metadata doesn't meet the correct standard. Use EPUB check. This is easy to make sure that you have a valid EPUB. Language shifts are often not there. So if you're switching languages in your EPUB, they're not marked up, or using the wrong language code. So even if you tried to do it, make sure you use the right code so that the screen reader knows what language to switch to. Links don't have a lot of visual cues and are highlighted with the same color as the text and can't be recognized. So make sure your CSS, and just go through it and hit tabs that'll go between the links and make sure that they're highlighted the way that you're expecting it. And so a low vision user will be able to know where they are. Tables are often missing the correct markup. Doesn't have the heading row, for example, which is crucial for when a screen reader is exploring a complex table. And I'll show you an example of that. Important things to note, number 3, frequently problems with color contrast. This is usually a holdover from the print book. Make sure that it meets that 4.1 minimum contrast for WCAG AA compliance. Emphasis and strong versus bold and italic are often confused with each other. Bold and italic are great for, you know, a visual indication. Emphasis and strong, some screen readers will actually stress those words. So when it makes sense to stress a word like watch out for the hot pan, you know, having that emphasis or strong designation makes a lot of sense. But just having chapter 1 in bold, or like you don't want to scream out chapter 1, having it in bold or italic, that's, you know, so most often you would use the bold and italic than emphasis and strong. Missing aside tags, secondary content often are not provided. And make sure you have all of your defined landmarks within your EPUB. And speaking of landmarks, these are some of the more common ones. There's a lot more. But yeah, cover, title page, front matter, start of content, that might be your chapter 1 or introduction. Back matter, table of contents, and acknowledgements. Okay, here's some code. I hope I don't scare anyone off. So having sections is a good thing. And then you define in your section, you define what this section's about. this is actually a chapter. So you have EPUB type equals chapter and role equals doc chapter. Now you have, you want to put in a page break, you put span and you have EPUB type as page break. You put an ID here, page 2, and the title is 2. And then you go on with your what's on page 2. So then you have your chapter 1, correct H1 markup, and then you have your paragraph markers and your content, and then you could have another page break. And again, now the ID is page 3, and title is 3. Now, if you look here on page list, this is how you actually link to those pages. So you have your you have an ordered list with your list items, and you have your introduction XHTML page, and that hash page 2, if I go back here, that applies to this ID equals page 2. And similarly, the ID equals page 3 will link to this page 3 link. So that's how this linking mechanism works. Tables, table markup. Having a table summary is recommended. With you have your caption there, and that heading row is marked with a TH. So that's table header stands for. And here we have just a 3-column table here with the headers being salad, entree, and dessert. And then when you get into the data section, TD, you have your Caesar, and we have chicken divan and chocolate mousse here. So when a screen reader goes through and they go from column 1 to column 2, they'll actually hear things like salad, Caesar, entree, chicken, dessert, chocolate mousse. So they understand it makes sense. And if these are numbers, if this is like just having 2, 3, 8 read to the user, they have no idea what that means. But if it says like, internal temperature, 55. Okay, now I understand. I have some context. So having the table headers, very important. Okay, let's get into some tools. I think I'm going to speed up a little bit here. EPUB check, freely available. You download it. It's a command line tool. I show you the output here. It validates. It tells you if there's any warnings or errors. Recommend having no errors and warnings. Okay. ACE. This is the new by Daisy. Daisy received an Impact Challenge Award to create a tool that will check against the 1.0 accessibility specification. It's open source. It's currently in beta. It's built using existing HTML checking technology for accessibility, excuse me. Axe by DQ is the underlying engine there. And it'll eventually have an API. It currently has a command line tool to use it. Creates both human readable and machine readable reports, and will help identify areas that need manual inspection. What it will not do is automatically check the accessibility, all accessibility requirements. It will not certify an EPUB as being conformant, and it won't check for valid EPUBs. You'll need to use EPUB check for that. So this is what the command line tool looks like. When you run it, it goes through every page and lists any errors or warnings it found, and then creates a report. This is what the report will look like, the HTML report. It has some metadata that it pulls out of the book, and it lists the violations for WCAG, single A, double A, EPUB, etc., and their severity. And then it provides, for all of violations, a table of what the violation is, what rule got broken, where it is in the EPUB, and then some details with links to the DAISY knowledge base for further information and help. And this is what it would link to for page navigation. Here's the DAISY page that has a summary, the techniques, pointing to the WCAG techniques that are used that you can click on, get more information, and some examples when appropriate. So help you, know exactly what to do here. And again, ACE is currently in public beta and it's free to download and is linked in my notes at the back. Then it also provides an outline showing you the table of contents and your heading outlines, and it'll warn you and show you in red here if you've missed any, or you went out from heading 1 to heading 3, missed heading 2, it'll tell you that. And at the bottom, at the end of the report, has all of your images pulled out, thumbnails with the alt text, and if there does find already described by, it'll show you what that is and any associated fig caption and its location. Okay, and to wrap up, I want to just briefly mention Benetech's Global Certified Accessible Initiative. We established this program to provide third-party auditing to ensure that EPUBs are conformant to the 1.0 specification. We launched it earlier this year, and our partners are DAISY, Dedicon in the Netherlands, RNIB in the UK, and Vision Australia. And we're currently working on that program to start certifying books are accessible. The process we use is DAISY's ACE tool to uncover accessibility issues. We then manually open up each book looking in a dozen different areas and checking to make and providing a Born Accessible score for each of these sections. We check all single A and double A violations and determine the overall conformance reached. We check for all accessibility 1.0 requirements, and we provide a detailed report that we give back to the publisher along with their overall Born Accessible score, how well they did. We've been piloting this for the last couple of years, and some of the initial scores were in the 40% Born Accessible scores, but those same books, after we gave the publishers detailed feedback, came back to us after they've changed their process, and now they're scoring in the 80 to 90% and passing WCAG AA. So this is very, very exciting to see that, they can make accessible EPUBs. And these are some of the areas we look at. Image accessibility, HTML tags, general accessibility, language, structure, links, lists, tables, everything I've talked about today, we look at. So now I'll open up the floor to any questions, and let me just show you, these are some of the appendices here. We have helpful links for the WCAG stuff, the ARIA, the digital publishing module for the doc types, the guidelines, 1.0 specification and techniques, metadata, structure semantics, EPUB check, DAISY's ACE tool, the BISG Quick Start Guide, and the Diagram Center's top tips and accessible image sample book, which Sue-Ann will get into image descriptions in next week's call. But I leave it there for questions.
Thanks, Charles. Just so everyone knows, we'll be sharing this presentation on our website. And if you registered through the Eventbrite, we'll also be able to share it with you there. I've also put a number of these links in the chat box. I haven't seen any questions in the chat box, but I think we'll just open it up for discussion because I know a lot of you are calling in by phone. I had one question, Charles, just to kick you off with the questions. Many of the people on the phone, I think, are creators of children's books. And I just wanted to hear from you about what challenges do you see most often in creating accessible children's books? What do you see that comes through a lot that isn't done right that many of our participants can think about when they're creating children's books?
Some of the issues with children's books is where they do non-reflowable EPUBs, and it's like fixed. You want the image, the pages to look exactly the way you intend them, but if you don't make them reflowable, then running these on a smaller device, for example, breaks. And so making sure that reflowable EPUBs is crucial and not fixed. So that would be my number one that we've seen with children's books, just because of they wanted specific, they want that exact layout. And the other thing is just the image descriptions need to be there. And a lot of the books that we've been seeing just didn't have that alt text. And then also the description itself has to make sense. For example, if you have an image of a boy with his grandmother, if you're looking at it out of context, you would just say, boy holding older woman's hand. But if you know that the boy's name is Billy and the grandmother, it's a grandmother, you would say Billy is holding grandmother's hand in the alt text. So things like that really make a huge difference to personalize and make those longer alt text meaningful.
And I will note that next week at the same time Sue Ann from Benetech will be taking us through the process of describing images in an accessible way. Thanks, Charles. Anyone else with any questions? Feel free to jump in.
On the unflowable books, what do you find that publishers do in response to that feedback? Is the thing to do to, they're probably not going to want to give up having the display exactly the way they want for seeing folks. Do they publish 2 versions of it or what?
Yeah, that would probably be what some of them are going to do, but just showing the publisher what that book looks like on, like an iPhone, sort of brings home how horrible the experience could be. So yeah, it's tricky. And, we're still trying to figure out some best guidelines to help them. And we're still working on that.
Sorry, this is John Hatton from SIL in Bloom again. One of the issues that we have a publish to EPUB option, but it's one thing to say, well, here's the EPUB standard and look at all the things you can do. But we found it was quite another to find an EPUB reader that we could recommend that implemented enough of the standard to show our books. And it's part of what drove us to now offering a separate app that just does our apps properly. And we still are committed to EPUB, but
yep.
It's quite a difficult situation. It's one thing to have the standards, but it's another to have the actual apps that implement it.
Yeah, boy, you're speaking to the choir here. This is just such an issue, and it's always a catch-up because the standards are changing. Then you have the assistive technology that changes to adjust for that, and then you have the reading system as an extra complexity, which is not always in compliance with the specification either. There is epubtest.org website that at least for the fundamental accessibility of EPUBs, there's a list of how each of these different reading systems perform. I know that Vital Source's Bookshelf or Cloud Reader is one of the better ones that scores, if not 100%, very close on a lot of different operating systems. But there are a number of other ones. Now, like extended image descriptions wasn't part of the fundamental accessibility test book. So a lot of reading systems didn't handle correctly how to access the longer descriptions. And so, we had this recommendation to use ARIA described by, pointing to a hidden aside with the text, and most of the reading systems just ignored it. And this was very frustrating for us that, that was the standard and the best way to do it. And then the reading systems weren't implementing it. So now we're, having to chase them down and do the right thing. So yeah, it's very difficult and testing on a lot of different platforms. And your idea of just doing it yourself, that's a lot of them are starting to do that. Exactly. So I sympathize, and but taking a look at epubtest.org might help at least show you some of the gold stars right now, and see how your content looks on those systems.
Thank you, Charles. We also have a question from Melody. Melody, would you like to jump in with that question? I'll just go ahead and read it. Maybe she's on mute. She says, EPUB Check and other EPUB checking tools are created in English, the ones you described today. To what extent are versions in developing country languages? Much of what is checking is code, but I assume language comes in at a certain extent, including reports and recommendations for improvements.
That's a good question. I'll have to actually research that one. I can talk to some folks at Daisy and see what options are available for if it has been localized. I don't know that answer off the top of my head, and I don't know for the ACE tool what their plans are for localization from the reports. But yeah, good question, and it's a good one.
Yeah, this is Melody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm in addition to that, and maybe that's understood, but to what extent does it matter, to the functioning of the EPUB checker? If it's only reading code, or if it needs to be able to understand the language that it's reading.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that doesn't matter. EPUB Check and ACE and those tools will be able to understand, as long as it's written in proper encoding. It should have no problem, and will display in the results if it finds all text in a foreign language. It will display that in that report, and if those displayed reports are in the have funky characters showing up, then what we can do is file a bug report with Daisy, and then they can fix any issues that pop up. But yeah, it'll definitely be able to work and show you the errors. Now it'll point to the WCAG violations, and that'll all be in English, but at least you'll know. But the content itself doesn't have to be in English.
Yeah, it would be great to get a sense of other experts and organizations that are expert in this in other countries, and of course we'll do our own research. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have definitely partners in other countries, in India and other places that are doing this. I just don't know off the top of my head what they use, and if there's any challenges that they have to overcome.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes.
I have a question. This is Brian Saliba with the Asia Foundation. I have a question, and if you're going to cover this next week in the image description webinar, then just refer me to that. I'll be on that one too. But I'm wondering specifically with children's books, if there is text that's integrated with images. So say a little boy bangs his knee and he's yow, and that text is part of the image. Would you just, and I know that typically is a no-no because that makes it hard for accessibility, but would you cover that? Would you make that accessible by including that yow sort of in the description of the image?
Absolutely, yeah, and those are the fringe cases that are completely acceptable to have when there's text in the image. it was really just like if you had a snapshot of a table or, you know, something like that, that's all text and no, you know, but when there's some graphical component to it as well, then yes, absolutely. You just include it in the alt text saying, you know, either little boy with a speech bubble saying ow or something to that effect. And Suen will probably cover that in more detail, and I'll ask her to see if she can call that one out and what our current best practices on how to do stuff like that that has voice speech bubbles coming out of the characters. That's a great question.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we will be going into detail on image description next week with a lot of very practical examples from children's books.
Beautiful.
We have time for one more question. Well, if there's no more question, oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay, false alarm. Well, if there's no more questions, I think someone's asking about any information on the business model for the Book Boost Access for All Challenge. All of the details of that challenge can be found on our website at allchildrenreading.org. We've also shared it a number of times in the chat, directly linking to that. So all of the details for that competition can be found there. We won't be going into the details of that on this recording. I want to thank you everyone for joining this webinar, and thank you to Charles for sharing his insights. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded with closed captioning and will be posted at our website at allchildrenreading.org. You should be able to see that on your screen now. Within the next couple days. Those of you on the call that are competing on the Book Boost Access for All Challenge, we look forward to receiving your submissions on January 19th. And we'd like to welcome everyone to join us next week, the same time, on Tuesday, December 12th at 11 Eastern Time, on guidelines for creating accessible images. We'll be provide a link to that in the chat box here shortly, where you can register for that event, and we'll be going into details, looking at samples from children's books and helping you work on that. Thank you everyone, and thank you Charles, and we look forward to joining us next week.
Thank you.
Many thanks. Bye.